Low code for KPMG is unavoidable in the current and future application development.
You can iterate so quickly in low code that you can have your subject matter expert and your designer right there.
We're seeing its use right across the enterprise. We're seeing it as a key accelerator, right? And I expect that we'll see more and more of that capability, in addition to the off-the-shelf type solutions.
One of the questions that Gary is with me in this topic, one of the questions that we heard more from our clients is not how we approach digital transformation, is how we can do it fast. Low code came in the top of our answers. Low code for KPMG is unavoidable in the current and future application development. Since we are on the business of transforming businesses, for us, low code is more than an instrumental. It could be a tool bench that can allow us to combine multiple technologies and allow us to accelerate and to deliver digital transformation. Today, we will discuss low code. And to start, I will ask you, John, to give us the baseline for this discussion and to elaborate from your perspective how we are in terms of the low code and what comes next.
Sure, happy to. So what I usually do when people ask me for sort of an overview is I start by defining what low code is. So low code, Forrester coined the term, are their software products for making software. But instead of writing code, coder, programming thousands of lines of code, they provide you visual, declarative abstractions for delivering applications instead. It's a lot faster than coding, 60 to 70% faster on average is my rule of thumb. They tend to be less fragile, easier to make changes without breaking stuff, and you tend to iterate more because you can develop quickly and change stuff without breaking and experiment and practice Agile and all that. And then probably the most disruptive thing is when you don't have to code systems, non-coders can write your systems. So at a minimum, that means people who used to write requirements, for example, like business analysts, can now deliver applications. That's kind of table stakes now. But what most firms are doing is they're also instituting citizen developer programs. So that's when people outside of technology teams are empowered and enabled to deliver applications themselves. So these benefits are pretty well documented, pretty observable out in the real world. And because of them, adoption of low code is very high, higher than you'd expect, higher than I would have expected. We just got our developer survey back recently, and as of now, globally, in that survey, surveying professional developers all over the world, 81% of developers use low code for at least some of their work. 43% of developers use it for the majority, so most or all of their work done low code. Between 60 or 80% of firms have an active citizen developer program, depending on which level of management you ask, so the democratization thing is also going on. And then you can see it come together in our metrics on fusion teams, so when technologists and business people both develop software together, 62% of developers say that most or all of their work in the last year was done on a fusion team with citizen developers. So professional developers are using it, companies are doing citizen development, and you can see them coming together in the fusion teams as well. It's nearly universal at this point. What happens then, though, is there's a pretty natural problem. When everyone's using the technology, right, for lots of stuff and lots more people are getting into the act, and development is becoming a spectrum, right? It's not a job, it's a skill spectrum. Effectively, it's what's happening in these very mature environments. Is you run into a real governance and operating model problem. So when lots of people are building lots of apps and changing them all the time, how do you enable and support and manage that and balance the risks? And that kind of filters into our inquiries from our clients. We have a lot of enterprise clients. That's what Forrester does, is give them advice on topics. And the number one low code inquiry we have basically is, how do I govern low code, citizen development, fusion teams, and all that sort of thing at scale? How do I set up the program? How do I set up the guardrails? How do I set up the processes and so on? And then the next natural effect of that is what you see in sort of the vendor side of things, the technology investments, is there's two big investments. One is directly related to this problem. a lot of vendors are investing into tools for governance and enabling lots of development work at scale. So configuring and automating policies, allowing you to have visibility into what's going on and that sort of thing. And the second big area of investment, like all the rest of technology, is AI to support the work inside the platform. So virtually every low-code vendor that I know of is actively working on AI to help generate applications and that sort of thing, as well as build quality and automate other tasks in the SDLC. So if you were to do a state of the union on low-code, that's basically it. It's used by a lot of people. The definition of who can use it is expanding like crazy. And the natural problems resulting are, well, how do we manage all this at scale in a modern enterprise? That's basically what's going on.
So probably it's a good moment to jump to Dominic.
Sure. So, starting, John, with some of the things you said, been watching low code for probably 12 to 15 years, kind of mature. And I really felt within the last probably 3 to 5, it started to hit its stride and go more from a hype cycle to reality. So we at KeyBank, brought it in a little over 2 years ago. And we heard a lot of the numbers that you stated, 60 to 70%, right, faster, therefore it's going to be less expensive, it's easier to adopt. And, part of that is, okay, is that sales hype or is that reality? So we started small. We went through a selection and picked the platform that we're now going to use for a majority of our enterprise applications, not all, but a majority. And we looked at kind of 3 things. We looked at, long-term, is the platform going to be reliable? Can it hit the use cases that we want to hit on? Therefore, also, is it scalable? Scalable means, for us, could it be mobile? Could it be client-facing? Is it just employee-facing? Can it do commercial as well as consumer? How scalable across our enterprise is it? That also means from a cost perspective, not just from the tech infrastructure, can it technically do it? But as we grow, we modeled out, hey, if we did 20% of our development on this, or 30 or 40 or 50% of our development, is there a point where we can not really afford to scale this application, right? So that was part of our criteria when we purchased the platform we did. And we wanted to prove it out. We wanted to prove out a few things. We wanted to prove, is it faster? Therefore, is it really cheaper? We wanted to prove, do you need full stack engineers? Can you take a BA and put them in there? Can you grab somebody that understands the business and teach them how to code, right? So we wanted to pilot that out. And so in our first year, obviously we set up the platform, and then we did I'll say a medium scale project. We did unsecured lending, loans and lines. And that was allowing us to see, okay, internally, could we do it and build a mobile app that we'd feel comfortable putting in front of our clients as part of this, right? And not do it on 2 code bases. So I didn't want to build a native mobile app and another code base because that was part of the cost. Can I build it once and it's able to go to the channel I need it to, right? So can it be a truly omni-channel application? Can we build the experiences that we're looking for, right? As we try to get better client and better employee experiences. Can we do it at speed? And what type of talent did it take? So we did bring in different talent. We have some engineers obviously on it. We partnered early on with both OutSystems and KPMG to kind of help us with the learning curve, right? I wanted to expedite the learning curve. So we brought in some external talent to help us there. But we did start training some BAs and some people off of RPA and bringing them in. Because part of what you do, and Rue, you mentioned, your clients want you to go faster. Part of speed of technology is the communication between who's asking something. Usually the business is asking for something, tech's enabling it. Often you have a BA that acts as a translator kind of in between. If you can shorten that and reduce the communication errors, you're faster, regardless of what code you use. Now, if you can then code it faster, you're exponentially faster as you go forward. So I would say after our 6-month pilot, I just said 6 months, we were able to deliver a working app in 6 months. That's pretty rare in the financial industry. It was not only up, it was in production, right? And we were piloting it. So we did show that it was faster. It was cheaper. And the talent to do it was different. You didn't need all full stack engineers. Now, to your point on following the SDLC, it does help to have full stack engineers and people that know the software development lifecycle. That's what's always concerning to me about going fast and broad with citizen development. If you lose how to promote things into production, if you lose how to manage data and secure data, and make sure you're using data in the right ways, right? If you lose testing, there's risk to that, right? So what we're doing at Key is we started with our pilot. This year, we went from that one app and 2 smaller apps now to many apps this year. A couple which I'll talk about a little later. And within that, as you start to see the scale, we start noticing, well, you do need some governance. You need some different pieces. How do we do training? How do we manage this as it's federated? So we're going back to that scalability. We're kind of learning before we get things out of control, right, in scaling it. So it's been a fun journey so far.
I really liked how you said removing the separation, okay? So people talk about Agile and they want to be Agile and that sort of stuff. If you look at all the Agile rituals and so on, they're built around removing the separation between what do I need and realizing that need, right? That's where you have sprints. So you go off and make something as quickly as you can and bring it back and get the feedback and so on. What you find in low code is that basically it removes the separation in a way that you could never do in coding. Like it's more Agile than Agile. We wrote an entire report on this.
Yeah, I think, John, that's a great point of, and I make this often with some of my peers and with other people in the industry I talk to, is we've talked about Agile for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, right? And we've iteratively gotten better at it. But Agile, even when you're talking about a month, you're talking about generally a small amount of tasks. Our last release with Account Central, which is one of our wealth products, we did 80 tasks in a 1-month release. So significant amount of change. The reason you can do that is because you've taken that separation, you've brought it down. You can iterate so quickly in low code that you can have your subject matter expert and your designer right there. Right?
They can sit in the room together, right? It's not like, well, describe what you want. It's like, is this what you want? And you can do it. And you're looking at the thing.
Or a week or two later, I come back and say, hey, we built this. Click through these buttons. Does it work? Yeah. Right? No, it's literally like worst case within a day, I'm going to get it back to you. Or I'm actually changing things. Like if you're talking tiled, I'm changing it real time in front of you, and you can walk through. Wait, that's not what I meant, John. I didn't mean to work that way. Oh, how'd you mean it?
Have you reduced your documentation at all?
Yes.
So that's another one of these things, because Agile, it's like, well, working software for documentation. Well, to some degree, when it's visual and declarative, it's self-documenting. So the system itself serves as a record of what it is and does, at least to a certain degree.
And that aspect of visualization is key, right? That's one of the big differences from our old delivery models, right? Where it was a lot of requirements and nobody saw what they were getting for a long time, to this aspect of iteration, right? That's where you really do get the interaction between the business and IT, right, and help to accelerate it.
And people try to do it with design tools, but then it's still not the app. Whereas with low code, it removes even that layer, where you're designing in the system.
But what was always step 2 was wireframes. Come up with the requirements, go into some designer system, go into PowerPoint, whatever you wanted to, and you created wireframes. They had no code behind them. Well, now you can just start coding the application. You no longer need wireframes.
The separation between will and result is shrinking down to this.
It's very interesting, and picking up what Gary said. And I had the opportunity to jump into many discussions of the teams during the project, not only due to the fact that there are more business and functional people involved, not only on the requirement stage, but also during the process of development. The mood of the discussions are much more business oriented. You see, during all the process of the development, deeply business discussions. And we are talking about banking. Banking is exciting enough. Account opening is exciting enough. But the discussions, it's very interesting because you see challenges. You understand challenges. And Dominic is here. And the flexibility that the platform allows us to adapt to that discussions, constant discussions between business and IT people, allow us to bump a lot of obstacles during the process.
It blurs the lines between technology and business expertise. And the amazing thing is, I wrote a report on this, there's data on that. If you look at low-code developers and compare them to coders, high coders is what I termed them at the time, they are like several times more likely to care about business results. So they care about how much money you make or how happy your customers are. They are several times more likely to measure their work by what the software did, not how many story points I deliver or whatever, but like, did it save money? Did it help the customer, et cetera? And they're also working on cooler technology. In general, they tend to be using, modern, more cutting edge things around container.
They're closer to the business function. Right?
It's the blurring of the line
not over
between
the
the two.
wall, right? And not, oh, I just have this spec that I need to code against. They actually can see what they're doing.
Because
and
it's
the impact
reduced
it
the
has.
separation between will and result.
And I think it's a great point, because one of the things I've heard this conversation for probably 20 years of, well, how do we get requirements to be better? People have talked about, well, what if we have training on how to write requirements? And I've seen companies spend millions of dollars on writing training to get people in better requirements. Guess what? They never got better requirements. So it's kind of like we were focused on the wrong thing. While I get why we were focused on better requirements, it was, how do we get those teams, that separation, to your point, John, and really about being less and talk to each other. Actually understanding what it is. It's not, okay, I have to figure out in Java how to make these 3 sentences do something. Why am I making it do that? Because I might even be able to come back to you, Gary, and have a suggestion on, wouldn't it be better if we did it this way?
A whole other way.
Right? And now I understand the technology. The other thing with the flexibility really that you brought up of low code that was honestly amazing over the last 2 years is how many times I have seen technologists sit down with business folks and the first part of the conversation is, well, what can that technology do?
What do you want?
I know what I want, but I know you're going to tell me there's limitations. So let's start with the limitations, and then I'm going to craft around those limitations.
Constrained design.
Yeah.
Yep.
Versus you want to go more greenfield, right? That's where you want to start. And one of the things we do in transformation is we always start with the art of the possible. We always start with greenfield. What is it that you truly want? Then if we have to bring in some constraints down the road as we're getting into true design, let's hit those as we hit them, right? And let's see if we can work around them. But if you bring those left, you're starting, 30, 50% farther away from the art of the possible. You've already degraded the solution. Why? Why do that? And low code allows you that flexibility. So as we go through design, and we've seen it in our recent project, we were able to work around a lot of system constraints that we had, a lot of API constraints that we had, and within
We solve it.
yeah, and within a month sprint, okay, something had to
solve
move
it.
from 1 month to the other because things aren't going to work with some of our older systems the way we thought they would. Okay, so we took an extra 4 to 5 weeks, and we solved the problem in a different way. In some of our older systems that you've purchased, you can't do that. Like, that's not an option. You're locked into a certain way, right? So the flexibility was just impressive.
So Dom, you mentioned 2 things I wanted to ask you about. One is, you talked about a software development lifecycle, right? And the fact that that's absolutely still necessary, right? How have you seen that shift in terms of sort of the way you're developing now on a low-code platform, both from a design, build, test, implement standpoint?
So there's a couple things, and low code doesn't make them all happen. So I'll try to talk about that separately. So, we specifically, when I go in with the transformation team, we really look at analyze and design, right? Through a due diligence period. Could be a month, could be 2 or 3 months, depending on the size of what you're looking at. But that is so important to truly locking into the scope and scale of what you're going to deliver, right? So that, the technology at that point doesn't matter. And I always, when I talk to my business partners, go in, hey, in 2 months, we'll start talking about technology and how we're going to deliver something. Right now, I want to know the business problem we're solving and what that solution is going to bring, right, in business terms. Then we'll start to figure out how to tech enable that solution and start to move forward. Now, when you bring in low code in the SDLC, you still need those parameters of, do you have the right security? Are you using the right data sources? That's one thing that happens, and we've seen it over, I'll call it with citizen development, whether it be Lotus Notes or other things that we've used in the past to code, even Excel. I can get data from somewhere. Is it the true source of data that I should be using for the task that I'm about to do, right? When you're following a proper SDLC, the answer is yes. I'm getting the right data and I'm putting the data into the right spot, right? And I'm managing it securely throughout that process. You have full testing.
Yep.
Through that life cycle, right? It's not like, It's not me, well, I coded it. I kind of looked at it, John. It looked good to me, so we're going to put it into production tomorrow. No, you have to go through full testing. You have to go through performance testing, right? Load testing, pen testing, all those things. All that is still critical.
There's no magic bullet.
There's not, right? You can't. Now, are there certain things, as John, you mentioned, AI is coming in, they can help monitor that with security? Can it help with running penetration tests differently? Can it help with maybe some of your volume and load testing differently? I think the answer is yes. I think we'll see that.
Also automating tests at volume.
Here's the other thing. So there's no doubt that good engineering of anything, software or otherwise, follows a process. What companies that are really going whole hog on the spectrum of developers idea are finding. So they have engineers, professional developers, consultants, business analysts, departmental IT, high-performing citizen developers are basically technologists. They just do a different job. People that diddle, they get this whole spectrum. Is that there also has to be so there's a spectrum of use cases, right? So there's big things, medium things, small things. There's really risky, critical things, and there's little things that if it breaks or it's wrong, it really doesn't matter, right? And then there's something in between. So what they're doing with the SDLC, and this isn't theory, I've interviewed companies, this is where they're at, is they basically say, okay, not all use cases are created equal. They have different risk profiles, complexity, data inside them, whatever. Based on the categorization of the app, the risk profile, what is the software development lifecycle for that? What are the rules and processes you have to follow? And they vary, it's dynamic, okay? So if Susie's supervisor is making something for her department with nothing sensitive in it, go ahead and do that. You may have thousands of those and they don't go through all that rigor. Then there's another category where it's like, well, okay, you should make that, Susie, but because of the number of people that are going to use it, or there's some component in it or something, then there's something else that is involved. There's another team, or there's an approval, or there's a testing regimen or whatever. So you start getting more into those engineering disciplines, right? Which what you find is those people actually start using those themselves. They start learning those things whether they were taught that, because when they get to a certain level of complexity, they just intuitively know, I got to check it first, right? And then there's the category of, well, no, this is serious engineering. This is our product we're making for our bank. And now we're into all the phases, all the testing requirements, the normal engineering disciplines, et cetera. But you have to cross that Rubicon of not all use cases are created equal, not all developers are created equal, and the SDLC varies. And what the very sophisticated firms are doing now is they're at that point, and it's on paper, and it's running pretty well, and there are thousands of people building large, small, and medium-sized things. Now they're like, how do we automate the heck out of this? And then it becomes a monitoring thing, and there's a probabilistic side to it, like you said in ADI. There's just configurations with access controls, there's processes, and then there's it's a DevOps problem. I know that sounds kind of technical and kind of out of left field, but to a certain degree, the idea of pipelines with automations, ensuring these risk profiles are managed appropriately and the right controls happen at the right time, at scale with people making thousands of stuff becomes very necessary. We're just starting to figure out how those pieces come together.
Yeah, you're hitting on a sweet spot from a KPMG standpoint, right? And maybe it's the background of being an accounting firm. It isn't just about bringing technologists or even functional experts to the table. It's about bringing people who understand risk and controls and how to apply them given the specific situation. To your point, if it's a simple internal departmental application, right, maybe it's fairly loose. But if you start particularly in the banking world, right, with the OCC and the SEC, right, ensuring that those controls are put in from day one makes it less of an exercise at the end to go validate that with whatever authority you need to do that with. And so we look at that from a 360-degree angle and bringing all the skills to bear up front, again, as opposed to finding, hidden costs at the end. We talk a lot about sort of the reduced cost in coding, but we need to look at a 5-year TCO on something like this, right? A total cost of ownership, in the sense that it's beyond the build, it's the implement, it's the upgrade, right? And merely looking at the full cost of that is really what you have to look at if you want to understand the true cost benefit of what you're doing.
Yeah, Gary, I think it's a good point. And Rui, I know you and I talked about governance. I think this is starting to kind of lend us that way.
It will lead us to that point for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So when you look at total cost of ownership or TCO, part of that is I can use low code and I can automate or simplify XYZ process. Now, how much did it cost me to build it? How much does it cost me to maintain it? What licensing did I need? Now you start getting into, if you have thousands of those, is that platform's cost sustainable, right? And that's part of that sustainability that you have to monitor. Now, I think that the nice thing is, if you have fewer platforms. I'm not going to say everybody's going to go to one platform, right, with low code, but if you have a handful versus 100 different systems that we have today, right, you can set up governance and start doing check-ins. So even if it is the smaller one and you have things rated 1, 2, and 3 at a risk level, you know your check-in for 1 is this and your check-in for 3 is this, right? But that check-in's automated. And the nice thing about this is DevOps, and that was part of the DevOps movement, 10, 12 years ago. DevOps is now built in for the most part into the low-code platform. So you don't need a separate tool set of DevOps and Jenkins and GitHub and everything doing different things over here. It's now built in. So one of the things, this kind of also circles back to a question you asked me a couple of minutes ago, Gary. What did it do for the developers? We actually kind of mapped out the time from a developer gets asked to develop something, right? And the myriad of, you need to get access forms. So you're filling out forms. You're not coding. Last time I checked, engineers don't love filling out forms, but they're filling out forms for access. Well, I need to get access to this system, this system, this system, right? And start doing it. About, I forget the exact numbers, but it was somewhere between probably 45 and 60% of the tasks that our engineers have to do before they start coding are now gone based on the platform we selected. So that means they start coding that much faster. So not only is the coding faster, but time to start the coding is faster because all that paperwork, right? We've already connected the system, we've already taken care of all that access just as part of the platform. And then if you have platform fixes that you need to do, you can do platform releases versus there's something wrong with code. We have to go into 100 different individual systems and change it 100 times, right? Now I can go do a platform release and fix 100 different applications. So when you think about that from a governance perspective of how you can check things in, how you can monitor everything that's going and how is it truly being used as it said it was going to be used, the more you can put that into one platform versus many, your governance of kind of your tech and your tech debt becomes simpler.
You actually hit on something.
This is the point. Let me add just a brief comment about the governance topic. The governance topic is very key for us, not only from our, background as a firm, but also in this particular topic we hear a lot of nice things that we can do with low code. It's true. It's feasible, we already done it, but there are behind the scenes. And the behind the scenes, I will underline 3 components. The last but not least, the people, the talent. We will still need skilled people. It will not be easy to pick up anyone and start coding. This will not happen, at least at the level of complexity and success critical applications that we are delivering in our clients with low code. We are not talking about using low code to build a nice app. We are using low code to build mission critical applications, to modernize legacies, to create real enterprise solutions with low code. And that means that you cannot do it only with citizen developers. We need bunch of skilled people, also skilled citizen developers. People is one of the behind the scenes that we must take care. The second is security. Security by design. You will not build an application and at the end you will see if it's secure. And low code allows you to embed during all the process the security and the frameworks. And that will allow you to save a lot of time. And at the end, the governance. And the governance can bundle all of these. Governance is more than decide who does what, when. It's much more than that. It's also define very well the guardrails of the utilization of the platform. Defines very well the components that needs to be taken care when you will reuse something. Otherwise, there will not be scalability with low code. Each time you do another application, you will reinvent the wheel. And one of the benefits that you can take with low-code application platforms that allows you to develop this kind of solutions, it's to reusability. And governance must define who are the components that must be reusable each time you need to do a different solution. No matter it's an internal one, it's a back end, it's a front end, whatever. And this is very important. And we are seeing very successful, all of these topics bundled in a solid governance approach.
Well, you actually said something, we haven't talked about this at all, but you said something interesting about the platform release. I haven't written a lot about this, but what I am seeing is a shift in the mindset of technology organizations around, less code is more better, basically. And a big part of it is because of that, because people are starting to realize when you build a lot of stuff on a single platform and you can update the platform, all the applications are fixed as a result, or they get the new front-end framework or whatever it is. Not only do you get modernization, but you get a lot of quality benefits, right? Like you were talking about, like some vulnerabilities exposed, you just update the platform and boom, everybody else is fixed. And that's not something you can do when you're creating all these, coded bespoke applications. You have to deal with each one individually.
And think of something as simple as a design change. You want to change, companies change a logo, change a color scheme, change, kind of the flow and how they want things to work. You can do that more easily on one platform. Right, versus, okay, now I have to go do this over 3 different mobile apps.
And you can only get that benefit by moving away from code as the medium you use to deliver stuff. You have to use more of these platforms with these models that you arrange into what you need.
Exactly.
Let's pivot over to Gen AI, right? We talked about it at the beginning, right? And it's come up, and it's obviously the elephant in the room today.
Will kill the code?
Yeah. Well, so that's the question. Is Gen AI the death of low code? Or is it an enabler? I have some of my own thoughts, but Dom, how are you looking at it?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I think it's an enabler. And there's a couple reasons. I mean, one, everybody now has a co-pilot or an autopilot or some sort of pilot that's starting to help what they do. And I think, Gen AI plays in several different arenas. One is coding. It still needs, in my opinion, a good platform that we can run the SDLC on, that we can monitor. So it still needs something. It's not becoming that platform itself, right? So it's an enabler within that platform. I think the question becomes, can you have many enablers in a platform? Is it one enabler in a platform? I think, that will come out in maturity. The other thing is, and we talk a lot about this, I talk a lot about hyper automation, in some of my conversations. Generally, it's not one thing that solves a problem, right? So low code itself doesn't always solve the problem. Right? You might need some sort of other code in there to do decisioning, or you need other systems to help you with decisioning. Well, AI is another one of those things that's going to help within a workflow. So when we talk about straight through processing, when you talk about zero ops, zero touch, those sort of things, AI can't do that alone. AI generally needs called somehow, right? So it's a module within a workflow. Well, what's that workflow? Sure, some core systems it could be API'd into, but I think in where I'm seeing the future go is it's low code. Low code is going to be a multitude, or a majority, better way to say it, a majority of the front ends, a majority of the orchestration engines. Well, it's an orchestration engine that's generally going to call AI. AI is there to solve something. Are you using AI to have better pricing, better rates on your mortgage or your auto loan? Are you helping it SAR filing? Are you helping it with reviewing, fraud cases? And obviously for us, we're constantly putting human in the loop with this. We're not taking human out of the loop and just having AI run something end to end. But AI is being called for a specific task, right? So we're going to have many LLMs that will each be kind of task specific. Well, they need called, they need to respond, and that answer needs to go somewhere to get a human in the loop. So I see low code as kind of that railway, so to speak, and AI being called from it generally.
And also as a destination of legacy modernization. We talk a lot about using generative AI and AI for more customer experience, but we can also use generative AI, and we are working on that jointly. Yep. On using generative AI and using also low code to modernize legacy. Yep. And you already have a lot of experience in that, right, Gary?
Well, it was interesting listening to Dom talk about sort of the use of AI, particularly from a business enablement standpoint, right, and ease of use. And I think that's a key use case. And just as important, though, is the use of generative AI to expedite coding and delivery, right? I've heard some wise people say that the next low-code language is English, possibly Portuguese, depending upon the country that you're in, I suppose.
It's a little bit more complicated.
But the fact of the matter is we want to look at Gen AI as to how it actually enables our existing developers and engineers, and possibly expedites the usage of a citizen developer, right? To allow them to go further into the implementation aspects. I mean, John, what are you seeing, or what's Forrester seeing, in the marketplace today?
So there's some theorizing around, as you said, AI can generate code and automate certain SDLC tasks. So does that mean you don't need low code because of the speed and all that sort of thing? The citizen development thing is very simple. Those people are not coders and never will be. So you need visual tooling, period. And the democratization of technology is an unstoppable force. But there's a deeper thing, which is the visual components are human. It's not just about democratization, it's human. That's why we use diagrams to communicate our will to the developers. And sometimes that's what people will describe as like, oh, well, you can feed your drawings, your design diagrams into the AI and it'll generate the code. It's like, well, that's low code. It'll be in the platform. Okay, so there's your design and it generates the code. And I maintain very strongly that you need a deterministic representation of what the software is and does. So the idea that you can describe in whatever your language is, I want an app that does X, and it generates code and you go, thank you, it works. I don't buy that. So are you just going to generate a bunch of code and trust it, or are you going to, and now you're dealing with coders and breaking it down to pieces, and it's the same SDLC we had before. So and the way you express your will generally is through drawings of what you want the screens to look like, drawings of what you want the process to look like, and so on. That's all low code is anyway. So I think there's a possibility that there may be low code platforms with, call it newer architecture, right? Where they still have all these metaphors for what the app is, and there's code generated, right? But then there's a deterministic representation of the code that's generated as rendered in the visual tools, right? Like maybe there's some magic behind the scenes with AI, so a new architecture. But that idea of I make software in visual tools, and that's how I express my will, and that's how I know it's being done, I think that is unavoidable. I don't think AI will change that. And no amount of, elegant engineering, prompt engineering is gonna solve that problem. And the enterprises I've talked to, most of the time I ask that question because it's a real technologist question. They're all like, it's us technologists. They're all like, well, what's the impact on low code? Will it go away? Actual enterprises are like, I've never even thought of that. No? Are you crazy? And then they'll think it through and they're like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And they'll say very similar things back to me. And most of them are actually expanding their plans for low code, both to infuse AI into low code applications, as well as because of the investments they're making to do some of the same magic, right? Helping you develop. So no, my current position is no, if anything, it'll probably accelerate it.
I would agree, right? And I would have said that Gen AI is an accelerator to the leveraging of low code.
Yes.
And then the impact of low code for the end user, right? So it's really just going to put it on wheels.
Yes.
But
That
this is the
toolkit
topic.
is still intensely valuable.
This is the
Absolutely.
topic. For the analyst and for the consultant, the business case is clear. And for the client, for the client.
Oh, I mean, for me, I think that the business case is clear because, again, it comes to how are we enabling the business results that we're looking for, right? That's the multi-billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
All the things that we're talking about are trying to make it easier to enable, faster to enable, better experience once we enable it, right? And that's where I think AI is so exciting. I think where people start to lose AI is they think it's one thing, and it's one thing that does everything. It's not one thing that does everything. It's a bunch of very specifically trained things.
It's a god you go appeal to.
We hope it's trained.
Yeah, it's not one brain that does everything, right? It's you might have 100 LLMs, so 100 brains that are working on 100 different things, very specific things. So they're trained one way. From birth through college, they were trained on one thing very specifically. So they're really, really good at it. Like that's the idea. That's how you start to get the confidence. That's how you start to get the security. You get away from hallucinations and things like that, right? By that training. So I think really the business case is there. I think it's how do we bring them in to complement each other. And I've started to talk that a little bit. We have an AI council at Key, trying to really step back and look at this. And when you look at it, this is my opinion. Most of the framework when you've selected technology in the past still holds true for low code, still holds true for AI. You still have to look at security, reliability, scalability. Right? You're still looking at the same things, right? Now the table stakes might be higher if you make a mistake and more speed and momentum. So you might want to have a little bit more scrutiny around it. But we're already pretty detailed in that process, right? So it's just really understanding where are you going to use it, what new controls do you put around it? You know, and a lot of people have asked me, like, business case for chat. Obviously, ChatGPT is the most famous thing that everybody, well, not maybe everybody in the world, but many people in the world have used. I would say I wouldn't start there because it's not controllable. I wouldn't just say somehow plug ChatGPT or another chat function directly into our chat function, put it into our client, because now your client's the prompt engineer.
Yeah.
You can't control the client as a prompt engineer.
Seems like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly, right? So there's certain use cases like that I still think we're a ways from maturing in figuring out how to use. I think there's some other use cases and business cases that are much more tangible that we can manage and control at scale.
And I like the way you said that. One of the methodologies that we apply at KPMG is what we call trusted AI, right? And a recognition that we can't give up the controls and we have to manage the risks, right? Because we're now generating as opposed to doing it, right? So even more important of keeping the human in the loop, right? About the validation. And it doesn't allow you to ignore testing, right? And whether it's integration testing and performance testing and end user acceptance, those things still need to occur, right? To avoid hallucinations, avoid it taking a design the wrong direction.
And traceability of the decision.
So should AI develop the tests for you? That's where it starts getting really recursive. It's like AI giveth and AI testeth, and it's like, wait a second,
it can help
I
write
don't
the
know.
requirements, it can help write the test scripts,
Maybe.
right? But we still need that sign off somewhere, right? The minute we give away those keys, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and that's where it's also, is it two different LLMs? One's doing the coding and one's doing the testing.
Yeah.
So you still separate church and state, and hopefully they were trained differently. But that's
probably how it'll
that's a
work,
new
yes.
problem, right? That we have to think through and solve. And I think it's, some of it, how we look at it is, lots of times people say, well, you don't want real data in a test environment. I'm struggling with this with AI. AI is a little different because I know how in a real life scenario, how that answer comes out. If I don't put that exact same scenario in with AI, I don't know how far off I am off that baseline. It's different than, okay, I can go train or look at an underwriting system. It's math. We can put in numbers. We know what the math's supposed to come out to be. We can test it. But if you're putting in, I'll go back to something, right, a SAR filing or a fraud case. You need to know what that person that's trained on that did and how that case all came together and what that write-up looks like.
Yeah, big picture.
It's hard to genericize. I mean, obviously you can take the names out to protect the innocent and all those things in the data, but
Obfuscation.
When you don't control the logic, you can't control the variables.
Yeah.
Right?
So you have to control that. To me, you have to control that variable. So I think it's going to shift a little bit the paradigm of testing and how we test, at least for the near future. Maybe we'll mature through it, but I struggle with that one a little bit.
Another use case I know we've been talking about is using Gen AI to help with conversion of legacy platforms, right? So leveraging an LLM and a data model to look at a legacy application and then migrate it to a low-code platform. What are your thoughts on that? I know we're still at the early days of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you said, we're in the early days. I would say I'm very excited. Obviously, we want to prove it out, and that's what we're partnering on and working on. But if you look at some of the difficulty of taking a legacy system and putting it over, it's not just translating the code. That's a very important thing. But often you have a legacy system that could be 10, 20, 30 years old. The people that coded that no longer are around, so your documentation might not be perfect. So how many APIs are there? How does it work, right? It's kind of a black box over time. So if we're able to have AI interrogate that older code and give us a better map of what's going on, what are the APIs, what are the functionality, that makes it simpler for us and faster for us to then create a new code. And it's not just translating it and putting it into low code, for example, and going forward. It's translating it, understanding it, and then deciding, okay, how do we want to take it forward? Is the logic and architecture sound? Okay, maybe you move it onto a newer platform, right? And that's just, it's a platform shift because we need to, right? Or, well, the architecture was sound 20 years ago. We can make it better. We can make that experience better now. We can automate certain pieces of that process now, right? Okay, let's do that before we reintroduce it into whatever platform it's going to reside on. So I think the ability to allow companies to move at speed forward if a translation software through AI works is incredible. And I think it's what I'm most excited about is, and we've talked about some of this earlier today, about how much money a company has. Certain companies can say, okay, I'm going to go dump millions into X and we're going to run 3 pilots simultaneously. Not every company in the world can do that. Some companies have to use a scalpel and be very, very careful where they're going to go put their money, right? Something like this starts to level the playing field. It allows the smaller mid-sized company to keep up.
Yep.
And translate and move
The
faster.
accelerator is available to everybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
So to me, it can be a great equalizer to a degree, right? It's not the only thing companies need to equalize, but it is a nice thing when you're talking about modernization to start equalizing how that happens.
I would say it's fair to call the using AI to accelerate, replatforming and modernization a trend. I've been researching this lately, and it keeps coming up. Presumably for coding, but I cover low code. It's definitely a trend in low code among big replatforming.
If you are modernizing it, makes sense to modernize it to something modern.
That you can then change and look at, right?
Yeah.
Not like we have code. Yeah. Do you have any wrap-up points you want to make, fellas?
Something impactful.
I think the wrap-up is very simple. We can call it a lot of names, but at the end, what we are looking for is for solutions. Solutions for problems, for issues that happens in the daily business. With AI, with low code, we are looking for solutions and efficient solutions. And I believe from our experience, namely the one that we are working together, that we are really facing some challenges, some tech-driven transformation challenges that could be successfully addressed by low code. Whatever that means. The low code that we are discussing here, right? Not the low code that everyone are talking about, because it's a broad concept. Takeaways.
Well, there's a couple of things I think we talked about, right? If I summarize, one is low code has a bright future, right? We're seeing its use right across the enterprise. We're seeing it as a key accelerator, right? And I expect that we'll see more and more of that capability, in addition to the off-the-shelf type solutions. The second is Gen AI is an enabler for low code, right? It is not a competitor. Yeah. And so there's a lot of opportunity to leverage it both in the development cycles as well as integrating it into the end user and business experience. Sure. The third is none of this negates the need for controls and governance, right? And so, we talked about a software development lifecycle, we talk about testing, we talk about risk and controls, all those things, none of those go away. There is no magic bullet here. And we need to stay focused on those tried and true components that we had that are now accelerated, but absolutely still require the developer, the citizen developer, right? And the business all working together.
Managing the approach of development is now the problem, right? The technologies get great. It's how do you orchestrate all the work?